Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. In the summer of 2024, a quiet coastal town on the east coast of the US found itself thrust into the spotlight by a crime that would shake its residents for months. A young woman lost her life in broad daylight, her final calls filled with panic and despair. Law enforcement launched a manhunt for a man with a clouded past. His name soon echoed across the nation. With each new clue, the picture grew increasingly nightmarish. What began as a routine criminal case unraveled into a tale of jealousy, aggressive behavior, fleeing, and secrets hidden within the very walls of a home that concealed a monstrous truth. Maxwell Johnston had long been known to law enforcement long before his name became entwined with tragedy. Raised in a troubled environment, he became involved early on in street conflicts. As a teen, he joined the notorious Bloods street crew, known across the U.S. for their violence and deep ties to the trade of forbidden substances. For Maxwell, this group offered a source of belonging and a descent from which there was no return. By age 20, Maxwell struggled with addiction and made his living through the illegal dealing of forbidden substances. His criminal record, preserved in police files, was peppered with incidents tied to such activity. Between 2009 and 2015, he was arrested 4 separate times, each stint ending with his release, only to return more hardened and confident than before. His final conviction carried a sentence of 8 years behind bars, the harshest of them all. While incarcerated, Maxwell learned how to endure a brutal prison system, which only hardened his already aggressive demeanor. He was released on parole in 2022, but nothing had changed. The following year, he violated the terms of his release and found himself back behind bars. When he was released again in 2023, he slipped back into his old circle, fully transformed into someone dangerous and unpredictable. His paranoia intensified. He saw threats everywhere and treated any resistance as a provocation. Women who crossed his path faced a particular danger, as his urge for control often escalated into physical aggression. Gabriela Caroleo's path, however, had been completely different. Born and raised in New Jersey, she endured domestic aggression from a young age. Her father terrorized the household, instilling a climate of fear. Her sister Anna was her only anchor. Together, they learned to endure the father's eruptions, finding solace in each other's presence. That shared experience of pain forged a bond so strong that it became their most steadfast friendship. As Gabriela grew older, she refused to let her past break her spirit. To those around her, she was known as a bright, witty young woman with a sharp sense of humor. She had the ability to fill a room with laughter, loved joking around, and stood by her friends. Her style blended modern urban vibes with self-reliance, piercings, tattoos, streetwear, and a music taste that ranged from rap and R&B to country. Above all, she had a passion for Nike sneakers, especially Air Jordans, which were her absolute favorites. The most important person in Gabriela's life was her young son Calvin, born in 2021. She was raising him on her own, but never felt truly alone. Her mother and sister were always by her side. Gabriela worked hard to balance her job and parenting, making sure Calvin grew up surrounded by warmth and care. Despite the challenges, she remained the heart of the family, full of energy and joy. These two lives were never meant to intersect. Maxwell, whose life was marked by aggressive behavior and crime, and Gabriela, striving to build a peaceful, stable life for herself and her son, came from completely different worlds. Their meeting would become a tragic collision between chaos and calm. He was seeking power and control. She longed for love and peace. That contrast would ultimately shape the devastating events to come. Gabriella and Maxwell met in 2023, not long after Johnston was released from custody. Their encounter wasn't the result of mutual friends or a long-standing connection. He entered her life unexpectedly, and things progressed quickly. At first, it seemed like a casual fling. Maxwell's charisma, smooth talk, and air of confidence created a false sense of attraction. Gabriella, someone who naturally trusted others and looked for the good in people, agreed to spend time with him. But the relationship was brief and unstable. Signs of hostility and aggression appeared within the first few weeks. Maxwell, who was used to having the upper hand, demanded control and took any disagreement as a personal insult. He didn't know how to let go and couldn't accept someone else's choices. For Gabriella, who valued her independence, it became a painful experience. The relationship ended quickly, but the story didn't. After their breakup, Johnston didn't back off. He began to pressure her, calling, messaging, and even showing signs of surveillance. Every attempt she made to distance herself was taken by him as a challenge. His behavior revealed the same paranoia that had once terrified even his own family. He saw threats where there were none, blaming Gabriella for the fears that haunted him. What made things even more concerning was that the aggression had begun before the breakup was final. During their short time together, Maxwell had already raised his hand against her more than once. Gabriella understood how dangerous he was. She had seen his violent outbursts firsthand. So when he turned their breakup into a reason to make threats, her fear was very real. By the summer of 2024, that fear had reached its peak. In June, just days before the tragic events, Gabriella confided in her loved ones, telling them plainly that she feared for her life. Her family already knew about his criminal background, but even they couldn't imagine how serious things would become. To her mother and sister, one thing was clear. Gabriella wasn't the type to exaggerate. If she said she was in danger, then something was truly wrong. Despite her family's pleas to be cautious, she couldn't fully escape his attention. Maxwell always found ways to make his presence known, doing just enough to instill fear and remind her he still held power. Gabriella told her family that he wouldn't leave her alone and that every time he showed up, it felt like a threat. That morning in New Jersey started out like any typical summer day. The sun was already high, the heat could be felt early, and the streets were filled with people going about their routines. For Gabriella Caroleo, there was nothing unusual. She was walking down the street, approaching an intersection, when a white Honda Pilot suddenly pulled up in front of her. Behind the wheel was Maxwell Johnston, her worst fear. He stepped out of the vehicle and immediately became aggressive. There was no attempt at conversation. His actions were entirely focused on intimidation and physical confrontation. Johnston attacked her right there in broad daylight. Gabriella, realizing the danger she was in, managed to grab her phone and called her mother first. The only words that came through the receiver were, "He attacked me. Call the police." Those were the last words her mother ever heard from her. Minutes later, her mother tried to call back, but all she could hear was shouting. It was Johnston's voice, and the rage in it came through loud and clear. Gabriella didn't have a chance to get away, and the attack escalated into a fatal act. Her next call was made to emergency services. The operator heard that a weapon had been used against her. Then came the sound of a gunshot. Gabriella had been shot in the side, the bullet damaging her ribs and hitting vital organs, including her spine. Despite the severity of her injuries, which were incompatible with survival, she remained conscious and was able to speak. She lay on the sidewalk, bleeding, as a passerby stopped to help. In those final moments, she told him the name of her attacker and gave a detailed description of his vehicle, its color, and license plate number. First responders arrived quickly and assessed her condition as critical. To save time, they decided to airlift her. Gabriella was flown to the nearest major medical center, where trauma teams performed emergency procedures, stopping the bleeding, trying to restore her breathing, and stabilizing her heart. Everything possible under those circumstances was done. However, despite their efforts, the injuries were too severe. Later that same evening, doctors delivered the heartbreaking news to her family. Gabriela Caroleo had passed away. The official cause was a gunshot wound with extensive internal damage. Gabriela's death was the result of several converging factors: Johnston's relentless behavior, the limited time for law enforcement to intervene, and the inability to protect her when she needed it most. The date, June 27, 2024, remains seared into her family's memory as the day her fears were tragically confirmed. News of Gabriela Caroleo's death devastated those who loved her. Her mother couldn't grasp the reality that the daughter she'd spoken to that very morning on the phone would never come home again. Her sister Anna, who had shared every hardship with Gabriela since childhood, was left without the person closest to her. But the most profound impact was felt by 3-year-old Calvin. He lost the woman who had been his primary source of love and care. He was too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, but the adults around him knew exactly what her absence meant. His life would now move forward without the one person who mattered to him more than anyone else. While Gabriela's loved ones were preparing for her funeral, the case took an unexpected turn. Maxwell Johnston's parents voluntarily came forward to speak with the police. His mother had begun to suspect that her son was involved in the crime and explained that his behavior had recently become deeply concerning. According to her, Maxwell had developed an obsessive belief about Gabriela, claiming she was stalking him and trying to hurt him. His family knew these claims didn't reflect reality, but they couldn't ignore the state of his mental health. On the day of the incident, his mother spoke to him by phone. The conversation struck her as disturbing. He kept repeating that he didn't want to go back to prison, and his speech was erratic and anxious. After that call, they lost contact with him. His father also confirmed that Maxwell had been acting irrationally and said things that sounded like a final goodbye. Gabriela's funeral was the most painful moment for her family. It was a day where grief mixed with a deep sense of helplessness. Attending the ceremony were not only friends and relatives, but also law enforcement officers. Their presence was meant to ensure the safety of the family, because the person responsible was still at large. During the service, something happened that intensified the emotional weight of the day. Anna, Gabriela's sister, received a message from Maxwell. In it, he mentioned that he knew the police were guarding the family. That meant he was nearby, or at the very least, monitoring the situation. The fact that he reached out on the day of the funeral felt like yet another form of intimidation. The shock of receiving that message deepened the already overwhelming sorrow. The family wasn't just mourning. They were forced to face the reality that the man responsible was still free and still interfering in their lives. After Gabriela Caroleo's passing, authorities immediately focused their efforts on locating Maxwell Johnston. Gabriela herself had named him before she lost consciousness, leaving no doubt about his involvement. But capturing him was far from easy. Johnston knew how to stay hidden, and his connections in the criminal world helped him stay ahead of the law. The first major breakthrough came when police found the white Honda Pilot in Newark. There were no signs of a struggle inside, which led investigators to believe he had abandoned it willingly. This supported their theory that Johnston was intentionally switching vehicles to confuse law enforcement. Though he didn't stay in Newark for long, officers learned that he had a contact there, someone he'd met during his time in custody. When police visited that address, they confirmed Johnston had been there, but he'd already moved on. Next came a tip from a resident in Howell who reported seeing a man matching Johnston's description in a nearby house. But by the time officers arrived, he was gone again. This scenario would repeat itself several times. Police would receive leads, but Johnston managed to stay one step ahead, constantly relocating and relying on people from his past. A clearer picture began to emerge. This wasn't someone acting randomly. He was fully aware that he was being hunted and carefully chose homes where he could hide temporarily. Most of these locations belonged to people he'd met while incarcerated. Those ties proved especially dependable, as individuals with shared criminal backgrounds often had reasons to protect each other and avoid contact with law enforcement. But despite all his precautions, Johnston made a mistake. At one of the houses, he left behind a phone. Forensics experts analyzed the device and managed to recover data pointing to his next planned hideout. That's how they zeroed in on an area near Tom's River, where a woman named Elizabeth Mascarelli, known among locals as Liz Grimm, was believed to be sheltering him. The series of misleading trails and temporary hideouts finally led to a precise breakthrough. The authorities had identified the exact location where Maxwell Johnston was hiding. For law enforcement, this was a major turning point. They no longer had to chase vague leads. They now had a confirmed address where the suspect was holed up with a woman who had chosen to help him avoid justice. 29-year-old Elizabeth Mascarelli was fully aware that she was harboring a man suspected of a violent crime. She knowingly provided him with everything he needed to stay hidden. The two spent 4 days together in her room, rarely leaving. Throughout that time, Johnston remained armed and kept his firearm close at all times. Police surrounded the house, but didn't rush in immediately. They first attempted negotiations, but the pair inside refused to come out. Johnston positioned himself by the window and occasionally displayed his weapon, creating a tense atmosphere. The situation escalated sharply when he opened fire on law enforcement. In response, officers returned fire and deployed flashbang grenades in an attempt to force them to surrender. But rather than panic or try to de-escalate, the couple reacted disturbingly, as if they were enjoying the chaos. The standoff dragged on for nearly 7 hours. Johnston and Mascarelli didn't just fire back, they seemed to disregard the danger completely. In the middle of the gunfire, they were reportedly physically intimate, with Mascarelli filming parts of the standoff on her phone. Images and videos began appearing on her Instagram account. One showed them unclothed, with Johnston making a gesture that mimicked a shot to the head. Another showed Mascarelli licking the barrel of the gun while smirking at the camera. These disturbing posts quickly went viral before her account was taken down. To law enforcement, it was further confirmation that they were dealing with individuals completely detached from any moral boundaries. Nearby residents heard the continuous gunfire and explosions from the flashbangs. Aside from Johnston and Mascarelli, 3 others surrendered during the siege: Daniel Bolstad and 2 individuals, both named Jared. They exited the home peacefully and were immediately taken into custody. Meanwhile, the main targets remained inside. Attempts to flush them out with gas failed. Johnston kept firing, at one point striking a police shield. Tensions remained high late into the evening. It wasn't until the tactical team intensified pressure that Mascarelli finally emerged. She had a visible injury on her head from one of the flashbangs and was immediately detained and taken to a medical facility. After her surrender, police deployed a drone into the house to assess the situation. The camera captured Johnston's body. He had ended his own life, mirroring the gesture he had shown in his earlier photos. His death marked the end of the manhunt, but not the end of the investigation. Once the standoff in Tom's River ended and Elizabeth Mascarelli was in custody, investigators gained access to the house that had served as the criminals' hideout. Inside, they were met with a disturbing scene. The space was in total disarray. Items strewn everywhere, bloodstains covering the floors and walls. A heavy, lingering odor filled the air, turning the home into a haunting reminder of the violence that had unfolded within. During the search, police recovered several phones. One of them, belonging to Elizabeth Mascarelli, contained images that dramatically shifted the direction of the investigation. On the device were photos of a deceased man, later identified as 56-year-old Kerry Rollison, the owner of the house. The images depicted disturbing levels of violence. In one, Johnston posed next to the body, making a gesture as if firing a gun to the head. In another, Mascarelli smiled while holding an axe, lodged in the victim's chest. These photos weren't taken for documentation. They appeared to be displays of cruelty and gratification. To investigators, it was clear. The killing of Rollison had been followed by a deliberate act of desecration. Mascarelli and Johnston didn't just end a life, they mocked it afterward. After analyzing the phone's contents, forensic teams returned to examine the crime scene more thoroughly. All signs pointed to that very location as the place where Kerry suffered fatal injuries. But the discovery was only the beginning. Near the house, officers found a metal incinerator. Inside it were the remnants of burned items, blood-stained fabric, and an axe bearing the victim's DNA. It was clear the suspects had attempted to destroy evidence, but failed to eliminate it completely. Further developments came after questioning one of the individuals taken into custody, Danielle Bolstad. During her interview, she disclosed the location of remains. Officers were led to a wooded area about 100 yards from the scene. There, they found large black plastic bags containing dismembered human remains, divided into 8 separate parts. Nearby were a shovel, a blanket, and a metal rod, items believed to have been used in the dismemberment and transport of the body. Medical examiners confirmed that Rollison died from gunshot wounds, followed by blunt force trauma to the head. Only after that was the body dismembered. Experts noted that the dismemberment wasn't random. It was done deliberately and with planning. The images found on Mascarelli's phone reinforced this conclusion. The individuals involved didn't just acknowledge what they had done, they appeared to want to preserve it. Unlike Gabriella Caroleo, Kerry Rollison didn't have close loved ones who could speak for him after the tragedy. A solitary man who, by 56, had lost all immediate family and had no ongoing connection to distant relatives, he lived in near total isolation. That's likely why the circumstances surrounding his death went unnoticed for so long. The house that would later become the scene of a tragic discovery had been occupied by Danielle Bolstad and 2 men named Jared, Palumbo, and Crisack. Eventually, Johnston and Mascarelli joined them. Investigators believe the residence functioned as a type of shared living arrangement centered around the use and storage of forbidden substances. Although there's no direct evidence linking Kerry Rollison himself to this activity, it appears his home had become a refuge for those involved in that world. Testimonies from the residents shed light on what life inside the house was like. They described an environment steeped in fear. Maxwell Johnston kept a firearm close at all times and made no secret of his readiness to use it. Witnesses recalled how he would sometimes aim it at others in the house, then laugh as if it were all a twisted game. Mascarelli mirrored his behavior. The photos recovered from Mascarelli's phone helped illustrate the psychological pressure others in the house endured. Bolstad and Palumbo later admitted they were afraid not only for themselves, but also feared they might be next. Each resident played a different role. Danielle Bolstad, a 42-year-old woman, became involved in helping conceal evidence after the crime. Jared Palumbo, 36, chose to cooperate with investigators and gave a detailed account of what had happened. The third occupant, Jared Crisack, took the opposite approach, denying any involvement, even though evidence suggested he had assisted in dismembering the body and cleaning the scene. Kerry himself was not viewed as a threat by neighbors. He was described as a quiet, introverted man who may have been too trusting of strangers. It was this very trust that brought danger into his home. Unlike the others, he had no criminal background and showed no signs of aggression. The fear described by the others wasn't an exaggeration. There was an atmosphere of constant surveillance in the house. Johnston monitored everyone's movements, checked who was coming and going, and used his weapon to issue threats. For Bolstad and Palumbo, this created a paralyzing sense of control, and they later explained that it was the main reason they hadn't reached out to law enforcement sooner. Ultimately, the residents' experiences revealed another layer to the story. Beneath the high-profile manhunt and dramatic standoff was a quieter, ongoing nightmare. According to Jared Palumbo, he and Jared Krisak were in the basement at the time Carrie Rollison was killed. They heard 3 gunshots, and shortly afterward, Johnston entered and told them to leave the house immediately. As they made their way upstairs, they saw Rollison's body lying on the floor. Palumbo insisted it was Mascarelli who had pulled the trigger, though Johnston had been standing nearby. That detail shifted the direction of the investigation and reshaped the understanding of each individual's role within the group. One particularly disturbing detail emphasized by Jared Palumbo involved what happened immediately after the killing. Instead of covering their tracks or discussing what to do with the body, the group went to McDonald's. They ordered food and ate calmly, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. This behavior highlighted just how distorted their perception of reality had become. A man had just been killed, yet some members of the group acted as though it were just another day. The next phase began, the dismemberment of the body. According to Palumbo, neither he nor Danielle Bolstad were allowed to be part of that process. He stated directly that it was Maxwell Johnston, Elizabeth Mascarelli, and Jared Krisak who divided the remains. This claim was later supported by physical evidence, the tools used, the pattern of blood traces, and the way the body had been packaged. Palumbo said he only witnessed the aftermath, black plastic bags being prepared for removal. Covering up the crime required the involvement of everyone in the house, but their roles varied. Danielle Bolstad and Palumbo were brought in to help transport the remains. In their own statements, Palumbo admitted to carrying the bags from the basement to the upper floor, while Bolstad loaded them into her vehicle. She then accompanied Johnston and Mascarelli to dispose of the bags in a wooded area. Palumbo, at that point, no longer participated. Palumbo's testimony became critical to the investigation. It allowed authorities to move beyond the initial theory that Johnston alone was responsible for the second killing. His account helped build separate charges for each person involved based on their specific roles. The trial that followed was the result of months of investigation. The primary defendant was Elizabeth Mascarelli. In court, she pleaded guilty and expressed remorse. She repeatedly acknowledged the horrific nature of her actions, but her legal defense tried to paint her not only as a perpetrator, but also as someone under intense psychological pressure from Johnston. Her attorney argued that she had acted under threats from an armed man, and Mascarelli herself claimed she had lived in constant fear for her life and her son's safety. Despite her expressions of regret, the facts of the case weighed heavily against her. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with a minimum of 85% of the term to be served, followed by an additional 5 years of supervised release. Jared Krisak's case was addressed separately. While he initially admitted to his involvement, he attempted to change his account in court, denying participation in the dismemberment. However, the court pointed out inconsistencies. Upon arrest, he had described details of the process, including the use of a metal bar to separate joints. His claim of being an unwilling bystander was not supported by the evidence. The court found him guilty of abuse of a corpse and evidence tampering, sentencing him to 8 years in prison. The cases of Danielle Bolstad and Jared Palumbo were handled separately. A key factor in both was their early cooperation with investigators. Their testimony allowed law enforcement to piece together the sequence of events and identify who had taken the lead in specific actions. The court acknowledged that without their statements, Elizabeth Mascarelli might have received a more lenient sentence, and Jared Krycak's role might have remained undiscovered. Both were ultimately sentenced without incarceration. Palumbo, who had no prior criminal record, received 18 months of supervised probation and was required to complete a rehabilitation program. Bolstad, who did have a previous conviction, was given a stricter sentence, approximately 2 years of probation, along with a requirement to cooperate with probation officers throughout. After Gabriella's passing, care for 3-year-old Calvin fell to her maternal family. While official guardianship documents were not made public, social media posts suggested that he was living full-time with his grandmother and Aunt Anna. Their pages showed photos of walks, family gatherings, and moments of daily life. To help Calvin feel safe and secure, they established a consistent daily routine, which included quality time with loved ones and maintaining items that reminded him of his mother. The family worked hard to shield him from discussions about the tragedy and instead focused on everyday activities that offered comfort and stability. Instead of focusing on words, Gabriella's memory is kept alive through meaningful gestures. A memorial plaque was placed at the location where her life was taken. Her family visits the site regularly, bringing flowers and items in purple, her favorite color. On special days, especially Mother's Day, Anna and the grandmother bring Calvin there. For the adults, it's a way to honor Gabriella's memory. For Calvin, it's a comforting ritual that shows his mom is still remembered and cherished, even in her absence. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into 2 opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdez could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never cross that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, they simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for, as the couple eventually parted ways in 2011. As a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana led into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental, and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, he would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection, but Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half-naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece. First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body, while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter, highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet. but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder. Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio. But above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was led out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. It was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Melina Cooks case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists, seeking to attract attention to their publications, even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family, and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Molina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click the bell. There are many shocking stories ahead. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, love triangle. No matter what the past experience was, new relationships are a clean slate. They offer fresh emotions and stir excitement. One has every chance to succeed where they might have failed in a previous union. However, emerging infatuation not only carries romance but sometimes also big problems. When choosing a life partner, you surely do not know what baggage they carry behind them. It happens that along with newfound feelings, you inadvertently take on burdens that should have been avoided. An example of this can be the so-called love triangle, known for its sharply defined angles. Horrific discovery. On October 5th, 2017, on the waterfront of the suburb of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, law enforcement officers discovered the body of a man. The found body was wrapped in a tarpaulin, strapped with belts on both sides. This grim discovery was located at the bottom of a trash container of a local supermarket. During the autopsy, it was determined that the victim had received multiple blunt force hits and knife wounds. Apparently, the man had been beaten over a long period. During the assault, the unfortunate man had his jaw broken and teeth knocked out, some of which ended up in his respiratory tract. Most of the bones in the face and head were broken. Only on the skull were 6 wounds inflicted by a blunt object noted. Additionally, 6 knife wounds were found on the neck, 7 in the throat area, and several more in the upper part of the chest. The injuries were so severe that in some places the flesh was cut through. Ultimately, the medical examiners concluded that death was due to head trauma, blood loss, and suffocation. The identity of the deceased was beyond doubt, further confirmed by the victim's brother. On the pathologist's table lay 39-year-old Nicholas Wilcox from Putnam, Connecticut. What events led this young man to such a tragic end, and whether his tormentors were punished, we will learn in today's criminal story. Introduction to the main characters. In the subsequent investigation of Nick's demise, several individuals were suspected: his girlfriend Isabella Tagliarini and her former boyfriend Eric Robinson. Both were also his neighbors in the duplex where our story's protagonist had moved. The house is designed for 2 families and features separate rooms, each with its own yard and entrance, a popular type of property in Florida. Initially, Robinson, who had first rented the place, sublet the vacant units. 38-year-old Isabella was the first person he invited over. She was from Brazil, where she worked as a flight attendant for a national airline. In 2010, Tagliarini divorced and immigrated to the U.S. with her children. She successfully married an American, which helped her secure the coveted green card. The marriage lasted until 2016, but over time, their passionate feelings faded, leading to their separation. That same year, the young woman began dating 46-year-old Eric Robinson. Her new partner was from a small town in Massachusetts, had never been married, and had no children. A romantic relationship quickly developed between them, though it was periodically turbulent. The passionate nature of Isabella and Eric's accustomed bachelor lifestyle contributed to this. Moreover, according to the woman, he was inconsistent in showing his feelings. He could be cheerful and friendly, then suddenly become gloomy and aggressive. For this reason, the couple broke up and got back together multiple times. In June 2017, shortly before Nicholas moved in, the lovers had separated again. Wilcox had known the couple for about 6 months and maintained contact with them. When he mentioned wanting to save on rent, Robinson offered him to move in and share the expenses. Initially, the neighbors had a wonderful relationship. They respected each other's personal space, yet often spent time together. However, over time, this neighborly idyll was disrupted, and problems began. As it turned out, Robinson was using and storing banned substances, which explained his erratic behavior and mood swings. On August 23, 2017, the man was detained. Shortly before this, he had reconciled with Isabella and was actually in a relationship with her at the time of his arrest. By then, Nicholas had already been living with them under the same roof. After Eric's detention, none of the tenants knew when the main renter would return, nor what their future held. It was possible they could be evicted at any time. Therefore, they immersed themselves in work to have a financial safety net in case of emergency. Fortunately for Nick, there was plenty of work, which was not the case for Isabella. The woman struggled to find suitable employment, so she began helping her neighbor in the construction business. The life story of Nicholas. It's worth noting that several generations of the Wilcox family engaged in similar activities. Nicholas's grandfather was a fisherman and built boats, and his father also dedicated his life to construction. Later, the main character joined the family business, becoming a roofer after graduating from school in 1996. Along with his older brother Donald, they acted as contractors, building their own client base. At the age of 23, Nick started a family. The young man tied his life to a girl named Kathy, who was his classmate in his senior year. A year later, the couple had a daughter, and 3 years after that, twins. Throughout this time, the family head worked diligently, striving to provide a decent living for his loved ones. Friends and acquaintances of Nick recalled that despite his busy schedule, he was a devoted husband and father. Yet he devoted a lot of time to his professional pursuits. Perhaps this was the reason for the family's eventual dissolution. The divorce occurred shortly after the birth of the younger children. Nonetheless, the father continued to communicate and support his family. A fresh start. At the beginning of 2017, following his brother, Nicholas moved to Florida. The new place promised better job opportunities. Here, the number of clients significantly increased. Additionally, the chosen method of earning became non-seasonal. Almost all year round, the state enjoyed good weather, warm and sunny, which creates excellent conditions not only for living, but also for business development. Moreover, the Wilcox profession came in handy in the new location, where powerful hurricanes regularly swept through the coastal areas. During storm season, homes were damaged and thus needed to be reinforced and repaired after the bad weather. Leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas continued to care for his children from a distance. According to an agreement with his ex-wife, he sent them money and visited whenever possible. Initially, the man stayed in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale. However, he later had to move to the suburbs to reduce his housing expenses. Irma. It was during this time that life brought him together with Isabella Tagliarini. The hurricane season had started, so Nick was inundated with daily orders. At that time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where the hero lived and worked. It turned into a powerful Atlantic tropical cyclone of Category 5, with wind speeds of about 177 miles per hour. An emergency was declared before its arrival. About 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. Nicholas spent all his time preparing buildings for the impending assault of the elements. He reinforced homes, boarded up windows and doors, and afterward was involved in clearing the resulting debris. Of course, all this was his main job, so he was paid for it, but he could not be called mercenary. In an interview, the man's older brother confessed that Nick never refused to help. One September day in 2017, as all of Florida was preparing for the terrible cyclone, Nicholas was busy boarding up windows with plywood. Soon there was a sharp shortage in stores, creating long lines. In one of these lines, a woman named Pamela approached Nick. She told him that she lacked building materials to fortify her home. In response, the younger Wilcox promised to solve this problem, and that same evening brought her the 7 missing sheets of plywood. He boarded up all the doors and windows of the woman's house and refused payment, even though he spent an entire day finding the necessary supplies. Nick was moved by Pamela's difficult life situation. She was left alone with children and needed outside help. In response, the woman thanked her rescuer. Heated romance. The hurricane brought widespread destruction, providing Nick with work for a long time. As a result, he decided to make his duplex neighbor his assistant. Isabella's duties included cleaning up after the projects were completed and handing tools during the work. As the young people spent a lot of time together, their friendly relations evolved into a romantic relationship. On September 3rd, the couple made a peculiar vow, written in blood and on paper, which served as a sort of engagement and a promise for a long and happy life filled with lots of children. Despite the strong feelings that enveloped the lovers, their union could not be called perfect. Almost immediately, minor issues and disagreements began. Arguments arose out of nowhere. On September 22nd, a serious conflict occurred between Nicholas and Isabella. The woman even left home and spent the night in a hotel. However, the next morning, the couple reconciled. According to Tagliarini, she lacked attention and respect from the man. He, on the other hand, thought she was exaggerating. Ultimately, their love led to inevitable consequences. The message. On October 5th, 2017, a man called the local police. During the conversation, he introduced himself as Isabella's former husband and asked the law enforcement officers to contact her. According to his words, she had information about a recent crime. The caller did not provide any more details. Despite the strangeness of the call, the police immediately responded to the message and called Tagliarini. From her voice, it was clear that the woman was hysterical. When asked by the police what had happened, she replied that everything was fine. The only thing that concerned her at that moment was a fight with her beloved man. She explained that he had left her and driven off in an unknown direction. However, when the police mentioned the call from her former husband, she immediately changed her tone. The woman began to cry and confessed that her beloved had not gone anywhere, but was dead. She also added that she knew where the body was located and was ready to show it. Crime scene. Law enforcement arrived at the address provided by Isabella. The officers were met with a house, all of whose windows and doors were boarded up with plywood, apparently in preparation for the approaching hurricane. Inside, there was a strong smell of cleaning agents and paint, indicating that the place had been thoroughly cleaned. In one of the bedrooms, detectives noticed the walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, likely in an attempt to cover something up rather than for a routine renovation. Their suspicions were confirmed by the discovery of hydrogen peroxide containers. Small blood stains were found on the bedding and the bedside table. It was also evident that someone had replaced the old mattress. Despite efforts to eliminate and paint over them, bloodstains were everywhere. The police suspected that the room had been the site of a violent crime, which Tagliarini had tried to clean up but hadn't completed in time, thanks to her ex-husband's timely call. Isabella was found inside the duplex, appearing distressed. During the conversation, she explained her state by saying she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call, which accounted for her unusual behavior. However, she confirmed knowing what had happened there and where the body was located. The unstable woman was decided to be taken to the station. By this time, the police had spoken again with her ex, who provided a partial account of the events. According to him, she had called him and told him about the crime. Initial version. Nevertheless, during the interrogation, the Brazilian woman claimed that Eric Robinson, her former boyfriend, was involved in the crime. On October 5th, around 2 a.m., the man came to the duplex and found the couple asleep. He was enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. He woke Isabella by putting a knife to her throat to prevent her from screaming. At that moment, she looked at Nick lying beside her, who seemed to be struggling to breathe. However, Eric did not allow her to see more and pushed her out of the bedroom. He then took a brass knuckle and a bat and began to beat the defenseless man. After finishing the beating, Robinson wrapped the body in a tarp and secured it with straps. Under the threat of a similar fate, his girlfriend helped him dispose of the body. However, the detectives were puzzled as to why, instead of calling the police, she had called her ex-husband. Isabella explained that she was very frightened and was looking for support and advice. According to her, the criminal also forced her to clean up the residence and eliminate all traces. Afterwards, he returned the phone he had taken earlier and left. Her confession raised doubts and required verification. Additionally, visible bruises and abrasions were noted on Tagliarini's body, which she explained were from being beaten by Eric after Nicholas's death. Investigation. The officers began their investigation by searching for the victim and his assailant. The suspect indicated where her boyfriend was hidden. While the medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement was busy searching for Eric. It was established that the man had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, the criminal had met a new woman named Merida, at whose place he was staying. She told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call after which he immediately left. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and set off again without any explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida explained that she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Robinson was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, and therefore, he was taken into custody pending further investigation. Eric's version. During the interrogation, Eric provided a story that differed from Isabella's version. According to his statement, Tagliarini contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite a restraining order she had received against him immediately after he was sent to prison. Despite this, she told him that she had attacked Nicholas under the influence of banned substances and ended his life. When Isabella came to her senses, she realized she couldn't manage the situation alone and asked for help. In return, the Brazilian woman promised Robinson that they would get back together and start over. As Eric still had strong feelings for her, he agreed to these terms. Fiery Brazilian. Detectives latched onto the man's words, wanting to interview the initial suspect once again. Given the circumstances and her behavior, it was clear that she was holding back information. Most likely, she was trying to minimize her role in the incident. Moreover, the investigation uncovered intriguing information. It turned out the woman was far from innocent and had been on the police radar multiple times. On September 22nd, when Nick and Isabella had a severe argument, it escalated beyond the confines of their room. Under the influence of Xanax and banned substances, she became enraged and destroyed some of her partner's belongings. Unfortunately, she also damaged his work vehicle. Consequently, the angered man felt compelled to contact the police. Moreover, she behaved so irrationally that he genuinely feared for his life. As known, the couple reconciled the following morning, and Nick withdrew his complaint. After this, investigators spoke with the suspect's ex-husband. He described Isabella as having an explosive personality and a fiery temperament. He also learned that during their argument, Wilcox had warned her. He threatened to contact immigration services if such incidents repeated. Nicholas informed her that he would give her a negative reference, which could impact her future significantly. For Tagliarini, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was paramount, so the fear of deportation was catastrophic. Could it be that during another argument, Isabella reacted explosively again and found herself under threat? It was quite plausible that her desire to stay in America could have motivated a subsequent crime. Not wanting to rely solely on existing statements, detectives began interviewing those close to the involved parties. An important witness turned out to be a neighbor of the young couple. Her windows overlooked the courtyard of the duplex. She stated that she saw Robinson arrive in his car on the night of the crime. He then took some tools and trash bags, and shortly thereafter, he got back in his car and left. The investigation continues. With substantial evidence gathered in the case, Tagliarini was called in for another interrogation on October 11th. At that time, the woman had not been arrested, so she came to the station voluntarily. Thanks to video surveillance footage, detectives established that on the fateful night, she personally transported Nick's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this, the Brazilian was neither frightened nor agitated. She acted calmly and methodically, making decisions independently. That night, she indeed met with Eric Robinson, but she was relaxed and friendly. At the same time, no one took her mobile phone, and she purchased the items needed for emergency repairs herself. In response, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella insisted that it was Eric who had threatened her with either murder or deportation along with her children. She claimed that she was forced to act as she did because of these threats. Although her statement sounded plausible, the investigators were cautious with their conclusions. Both Robinson and Tagliarini's backgrounds raised suspicions. Eric also had a turbulent past. He first caught police attention in 2001, mainly for possession and distribution of narcotics. At the same time, Isabella had every reason to fear him. In August 2016, he committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was caught for strangulation, and in the same year, for possession of substances. Neighbors reported being afraid of the man and tried to avoid him due to his aggressive and erratic behavior. The next interrogation of the Brazilian woman took place on October 14th. Despite her claims of not having touched Nick, experts found traces of her DNA on the man's body, thus contradicting her statements. According to the investigation, she participated in the violent crime against her lover, at least in the disposal of the body and the elimination of evidence. However, neither suspect admitted to any wrongdoing. While Robinson was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Everyone was anticipating the start of the court proceedings. However, due to various complications and delays, the trial did not take place until 5 years later. The significant delay was caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 and a series of bureaucratic snags. During this time, the prosecution clearly formed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed all information gathered during the investigation. Additionally, during this period, another significant piece of evidence was uncovered. The prosecution managed to recover Robinson's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime against his former friend. Over these years, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to a lesser charge. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Eric. Sentencing. On April 10, 2023, the trial of Eric Robinson finally took place. The prosecution argued that he was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas. Isabella's role was not presented as that of a co-conspirator, but as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, which is also criminally punishable. Legal complexities caused several hearing cancellations, and the trial resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Robinson was charged with premeditated murder. Despite Tagliarini providing inconsistent testimonies and contradicting herself, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution focused on witness statements that described Eric's unusual actions on the night of the crime. To avoid GPS tracking, the accused used his new girlfriend's car, which was not equipped with satellite tracking, and he also left his mobile phone at home. Meanwhile, other case details were not concealed. It became known that after the crime, Isabella and Eric had an intimate encounter in the next room. She explained her condition by stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives and also feared for her life. After hearing both sides, it became clear that jealousy was the motive for the brutal and senseless murder of Wilcox. While Isabella claimed that she had ended the relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. Upon his release, the accused returned home, but the changes that had occurred in the meantime fueled his rage and hatred. During this period, he plotted revenge against his rival and committed a cold-blooded attack while the couple was most vulnerable in their sleep. His first strike effectively sealed the fate of his former friend. He then attempted to dispose of the evidence by scattering it in various locations. The murder weapon was found in a landfill. The deceased man's body was wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Afterwards, Isabella painted over blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area. Throughout these actions, Eric communicated with Isabella and directed her actions. Eventually, 51-year-old Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for second-degree murder. Isabella Tagliarini was found guilty of aiding the criminal, but threats and coercion were considered mitigating circumstances. She received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Remarkably, the convicted woman was indeed ready to do anything for U.S. citizenship. It was revealed that 10 days after Robinson was incarcerated, the parties signed another pledge. In it, Eric promised to marry Isabella, but he did not manage to do so. She was prepared to marry him shortly after he dealt with her lover. It appears that this unprincipled woman is indifferent about whom she marries. The main thing is to maintain her status. All men Isabella Tagliarini has been involved with were used for her selfish purposes and, in one way or another, were inclined toward marriage. Apparently, for her, nothing is more important than American citizenship, even if it comes at any price. To summarize this story, one might say, opportunity in life isn't singular, but life itself is. Unfortunately, some characters in this tale never realized this, while others did but much too late. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you. A quiet, suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other and nothing seems out of the ordinary. The morning begins as usual with a call to the police, concerned neighbors, and puzzled family members. The house appears perfectly normal. No signs of a struggle, everything seemingly in its place. But one detail disrupts this familiar picture: a woman seated too calmly in an armchair by the fireplace. Everything points to a swift, carefully planned act, but something in this story doesn't quite add up. The neighbors insist that no one had entered during the night, and her husband says he was out on a morning run, leaving the house as usual. So why is there a photograph on the table, showing the two of them together with the caption, "Forever?" Let's begin another dark story, a tale where every fact is concealed behind layers of well-crafted deceit. It was an August morning in 2010, around 5 a.m. As usual, Sadish was the first to wake. The house was still in silence, and he moved carefully so as not to disturb it. The residents of Holy Mount, a neighborhood in southern Bangalore, knew him as a modest, almost invisible presence. But little did they know the thoughts that occupied his mind during his early morning runs. This hour was his time to think, about his career, his plans, his future with Priyanka. As he left the house at 5:40, he took one last look at the windows, where his wife was probably just beginning her morning yoga. Priyanka also valued these early hours, spending them alone, moving through her familiar yoga routine, which gave her strength and balance before a long workday. She taught mathematics at a prestigious school on Kanakapura Road, known for its high standards and demanding curriculum. Her colleagues and students saw her as a strict but caring teacher, and parents often expressed gratitude for the genuine attention she gave to their children. Satish and Priyanka had moved to Holy Mount a couple of years ago, renting a home on a quiet street where family bonds were strong and houses stood shielded from prying eyes. This was a neighborhood where neighbors had known each other for decades and rarely intruded into each other's personal lives, which suited Satish Gupta very well. Their life was calm and steady, and they blended in seamlessly with the other families around them. Although they rented, their house became a sanctuary, and Priyanka infused it with warmth and a cozy atmosphere, which even occasional guests felt when they came by for tea. But there were aspects of their life known only to them. They didn't have children, a topic that occasionally came up with others, but they didn't make an issue of it. Within their marriage, Satish and Priyanka found harmony. They were comfortable together, and it suited them to shape their future as they envisioned it. They had decided to channel their efforts into acquiring a home of their own, a real place of strength, where they could invest not only money but also their hearts. About 2 months ago, this idea finally began to take shape. They chose a plot on the outskirts of the city, among hills and fields, where they would build their home. The anticipation of this project had become a new source of inspiration for them. Satish's morning route wound through quiet streets just beginning to stir, the city's early rhythm matching the flow of his thoughts. It was 6:40 a.m. when Satish returned from his run. His steps had slowed, and his heartbeat was steadying. But then his phone vibrated, showing Priyanka's name on the screen. She rarely called him at this hour, so he immediately felt a sense of unease. Her voice was tense and anxious. She explained that 2 strangers had appeared near the house, introducing themselves as paper collectors and asking if they had any old newspapers or scrap paper. It was a common enough request, but there was one strange thing. They looked at her in an unsettling way. In their neighborhood, it was rare to see anyone that early, especially collectors. Plus, the stores were still closed and the streets were empty. Satish's pulse quickened. He immediately told Priyanka not to go near the door and promised he'd be back as soon as possible. Nearly running toward the house, he couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. The whole situation felt strange and illogical, and the closer he got to home, the stronger a cold fear took hold. As he reached the porch, he saw that the street was empty. The so-called collectors were gone. The porch was silent and still. He rang the doorbell, expecting Priyanka to answer right away, but there was no response. The silence felt too loud, too charged. He tried calling her again, but her phone was silent. His unease turned into genuine fear. Satish realized he didn't have a spare key, and Priyanka likely had her key on her. That meant he couldn't get inside, and with each passing second, his anxiety grew stronger. Almost feverish with worry, he decided to rush back to the office, where they kept an extra key. All he could do was hope that Priyanka was okay. When he finally returned and opened the door, his hands were trembling. He stepped inside, immediately sensing something was wrong. The air in the house was thick and tense, as if it concealed a terrible secret. As he entered the living room, Satish froze. Priyanka was there, tied to a chair, her arms bound to the armrests. A deep wound crossed her neck, and blood was slowly pooling on the floor. A chill ran through his body, as if everything inside him had turned cold. On autopilot, he reached for his phone, dialing for emergency services. The words he spoke sounded hollow, as if they didn't come from his own voice. He called the police, barely aware of what he was saying, as if in a trance. Officers from the Holy Mount precinct arrived almost immediately, but they didn't need a briefing on what awaited them inside. Each of them froze at the sight of the tragic scene unfolding in the living room. People accustomed to confronting brutal acts were struck by the sight of Priyanka, tied to the chair, amid the remnants of a once cozy home, now shattered by this horrific event. The lead investigator gave a composed order that no one was to touch the body or any furniture until the forensic team arrived, though even he couldn't immediately pull his gaze away from the tragic scene. The room held no trace of the people who had done this, no obvious clue left behind. All that remained was pain, bitterness, and an overwhelming silence. Sadish stood in shock, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before him. When his parents arrived, they rushed to his side, but he remained trapped in his own horror, as if numb to everything around him. Words failed everyone. Priyanka's parents didn't hear the terrible news until the next morning. In a house that, just a day before, had been filled with plans and hopes, now only a crushing silence lingered. All that remained of Sadish's former life was memories. His sobs, punctuated by deep breaths, echoed through the empty house, leaving no space for sound, no room for peace. The officers, though accustomed to horrific scenes, tried to stay at a respectful distance, avoiding his gaze. The pain was too raw. One officer attempted to approach, offering him a glass of water, but Sadish didn't respond. He seemed locked within his own thoughts, his stare fixed on the spot where life had once held its warmth. Meanwhile, the police began a thorough examination of the house, leaving no corner unchecked. Those two mysterious paper collectors Priyanka had mentioned became a particular point of interest, and officers immediately started questioning neighbors and others in the area. But to their surprise, no one had seen or heard of these individuals. The statements created a puzzle. Where had these strangers gone? Sadish was adamant that they were the reason he felt alarmed enough to come back early from his run. Despite his certainty, a hint of doubt crept into the officers' minds. As they investigated further, another odd detail emerged. Cash and jewelry were missing. With difficulty, Sadish explained that he had been setting aside money to buy his wife a car as a surprise anniversary gift. It was his little secret, a plan he had carefully saved for, intending to create a joyful surprise. But now, his savings were gone, along with Priyanka's jewelry, which had meant so much to her. The amount stolen made police wonder if this crime could have been a robbery. However, the absence of any sign of forced entry presented a mystery. It looked as if whoever committed this act knew exactly what they were looking for and had planned every detail. The following morning, Priyanka's family received her remains, and Sadish took on the difficult task of arranging the ceremony for her cremation. The service was held in silence, broken only by the heavy sighs and quiet sobs of those in attendance. Friends and relatives, devastated by what had happened, came to pay their respects, struggling to believe the reality before them. Priyanka's parents stood by Sadish, their faces reflecting an inexpressible grief and unanswered questions. Their daughter's life had ended so abruptly, so tragically, that they found it hard to grasp the truth of it all. While officers combed through the house, the story was quickly gaining public attention. Before the funeral was even over, reporters had gathered outside, eager for any information about what had happened. News of the tragedy spread across Bangalore, shocking a city that, though no stranger to crime, was deeply disturbed by this incident. The community demanded answers. People wanted to know who could have committed such an act, and what could have driven this level of cruelty. Calls for justice echoed from all sides, and accusations of police inaction began to circulate. Sadish felt time slipping away, with the investigation seeming to stagnate. He couldn't accept this sense of injustice. One day, he walked to the police station and, without going inside, sat down right outside the entrance. His resolve was clear. He would stay there until the police found the person responsible for his wife's death. With each passing day, his protest drew more attention. At first, passers-by stopped out of curiosity, but soon his silent demonstration became a talking point in the papers and on the news. Journalists began interviewing locals, many expressing sympathy, while criticism of the police grew. Why was the search taking so long when fresh clues should have been available? Why wasn't there more progress? Each day, Sadish returned to those stone steps, sitting in quiet mourning as people passed by, moved by his grief. Some paused to offer condolences, others brought him water, and occasionally he received notes of encouragement. The police, unsure of how to respond, tried to convince him to go home, assuring him they were doing everything possible, but Sadish held firm. Meanwhile, the officers were not idle. They dug deep into every aspect of Sadish and Priyanka's life, interviewing friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Every account they heard was the same. There were no signs of tension, No arguments between the couple. They had led a peaceful, happy life, and no one had a single doubt about their harmonious relationship. The investigators couldn't find evidence of enemies or grudges, leaving them with only more questions. All signs pointed to Satish and Priyanka as a typical, contented couple. What then was the motive? Everything suggested a robbery, but why had it turned so violent? As time wore on, public dissatisfaction with the investigation mounted. Satish's protest outside the station was only fueling the growing frustration, prompting people to question police action. Before long, Satish had become something of a local hero. His story had spread throughout the city, and now everyone waited to see when the police would provide answers. On the evening of August 13th, several officers, watching his quiet vigil outside, decided to invite him into the station. Satish couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope, wondering if there had finally been a breakthrough. But things would turn out differently. As soon as Satish entered the office, police officers surrounded him, scrutinizing his statements for any inconsistencies. The questions became increasingly precise, and Satish realized they were focused on the details of that fateful morning. They asked him when he left for his run, what time he received Priyanka's call, and exactly when he returned home. Satish tried to respond confidently, but with each answer, he felt the tension around him growing. The officers mentioned that Priyanka's call was logged at 5:55 a.m., and according to his statements, he returned around 6:40. Yet they pointed out that the distance didn't quite match the time he claimed it took him to return. The officers were starting to pick up on small discrepancies in Satish's account, which only raised their suspicions further. They pressed harder, asking for specifics about his actions that morning, his exact return time, and why he hadn't answered Priyanka's call immediately. Finally, they brought up the spare key he had reportedly gone back to the office to retrieve. Satish explained that he had entered the building briefly, grabbed the key from a drawer, and left without delay. However, the officers revealed that surveillance footage showed he hadn't passed through the turnstile at all. He had only lingered at the entrance before leaving. With each new detail, Satish's nerves became more evident. Detecting this, the officers intensified their questioning, not allowing him room to avoid any answers. The question of how he could have retrieved the key without entering the office remained unresolved. Satish insisted he had gone inside, but the camera footage suggested otherwise. According to Satish, when he returned home, he unlocked the door and immediately found his wife's body. The sight had shocked him, but he claimed he had called the emergency services right away to report the tragedy. Satish maintained that, when he entered, he was alone with Priyanka. Neighbors confirmed that they hadn't noticed anything unusual that day. Residents on the floors above and below even remarked that if anyone had been asking for old newspapers, they would have known, as collectors in their area always visited each apartment in turn. But that hadn't happened, and this only added more confusion to the investigation. Determined to unravel the truth, police began analyzing Satish's statements closely, trying to piece together what had occurred in the Gupta household. Satish insisted he had hurried home after hearing about the suspicious visitors from Priyanka. But as detectives dissected his version of events, they uncovered numerous inconsistencies. The more he recounted his story, the more tangled the details became. Sitting across from the investigators, Satish's face grew increasingly pale as they circled back to his statements, studying his every reaction. The officers watched him carefully, noting how his gaze shifted and how his hands trembled ever so slightly. Every gesture, every pause, every change in tone became a potential clue. During the interrogation, investigators reviewed Satish and Priyanka's phone data, which raised further suspicions. Records showed that their phones were within the same cell tower range at the time of her death, indicating that Satish was nearby, even though he claimed to be out on his morning run. The entire story grew increasingly contradictory, and Satish became visibly uneasy with each new question. His tale of the paper collectors seemed less and less convincing, and detectives began to suspect there might be an entirely different motive behind this crime. When officers examined the items found around the house, their suspicions deepened. A pair of dirty gloves, a set of boots, and a sleeveless jacket with stains were hidden in a dark corner under the stairs, as if deliberately placed out of sight. A pack of cigarettes also caught their attention. Neither Satish nor Priyanka smoked, but there it was on the floor, as if someone had either carelessly left it behind or intended to mislead the investigation. Forensic experts began to wonder who could have left these peculiar clues. The autopsy report added new and disturbing details. Priyanka had not only suffered a wound to the neck, but was also strangled beforehand, followed by several non-lethal cuts to her abdomen. These injuries pointed to a calculated level of cruelty. Furthermore, there were no signs of struggle on her body, suggesting that she hadn't resisted the assault. Had this been a typical robbery, Priyanka would likely have tried to defend herself, and signs of a struggle would have been evident. Yet forensic analysis found none. When Satish informed the police that cash and jewelry were missing from the house, they decided to conduct a thorough search of every nook and cranny. Surprisingly, despite his claims, a significant amount of cash, around 100,000 rupees, was discovered hidden in a discreet spot within the house. This raised new questions. How could Satish have overlooked such a large amount? If this had truly been a robbery, the perpetrator would likely have taken everything of value. Further investigation revealed that Priyanka's earrings, a ring, and a necklace also hadn't been taken, which cast serious doubt on the robbery theory. During yet another interrogation, the detectives confronted Satish with direct questions, showing him photos of Priyanka's jewelry. These items were valuable, and if a thief had indeed broken into the house, they would have taken them. Satish hesitated, fumbling with his answers as the questions became increasingly pointed. His responses grew inconsistent, and the foundation of his story seemed shakier than ever. The investigators began to suspect that a more complex motive lay behind the crime, something deeper than a simple burglary. They began wondering if hidden tensions in Satish and Priyanka's relationship might have led to this tragedy. As the questioning intensified, Satish grew visibly more anxious. His responses became muddled, his sentences more disjointed. Initially, he denied any involvement in the crime, but as the pressure mounted, he finally broke down. At first, his voice was soft, uncertain, but then, as if something within him gave way, he confessed. Satish and Priyanka's story appeared to have started as a classic arranged marriage. In 2007, their families agreed to the union, and although both Satish and Priyanka initially consented, differences began to emerge over time. Satish, a native of Bangalore, had strong family ties and was raised with a deep sense of tradition and respect for his parents. His loyalty to his family was unwavering, and frequent visits to his parents felt natural to him. Priyanka, however, came from Uttar Pradesh, where she was used to greater independence and believed Satish's primary duty was to her and their household, not to his parents. She expected his undivided attention, even suggesting at one point that he replace his family pendant with a locket bearing her photo, symbolizing that she should now be the focus of his life. Satish tried to find a compromise, but a couple of years into the marriage, the tensions grew worse. Priyanka persistently urged him to move into a separate home, further from his family. Although it was difficult for him, Satish eventually agreed, hoping that the move would ease the strain on their relationship. They rented an apartment in the Holy Mount neighborhood, and for a while, things between them seemed to improve. But soon, Priyanka began pressuring him again, this time demanding that he reduce contact with his family, especially when his father's business encountered difficulties, and they needed some financial support. Satish wanted to help his parents, but Priyanka adamantly opposed it, forbidding him even from calling them. Resentment and anger built within Satish with each of Priyanka's remarks, especially considering that she maintained close daily contact with her own parents. For him, this was unbearable. His bitterness deepened, and he could feel his disappointment turning into hatred, though he tried to keep his feelings hidden. By April 2010, it seemed life was taking a turn for the better. They had just purchased a plot of land where they planned to build their own home. Family and friends gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony to show their support. But when Satish's parents arrived, Priyanka suddenly forbade them from entering, declaring that this land was exclusively for her and Satish, and that his parents had no place there. Satish was occupied with the ritual at the time, learning of the incident later from friends. He was shocked, and in that moment, he felt that he could never forgive her for the humiliation. From that point, a plan began forming in Satish's mind, one he kept hidden. Outwardly, he tried to appear as a caring and devoted husband, giving Priyanka ample attention to convince her that he had forgiven her behavior. To others, it looked as though their marriage was enjoying a new phase of happiness and unity, with the land purchase drawing them closer than ever. Yet deep within, Entirely different emotions were brewing. He was developing his plan, masking it behind polite smiles and gestures of affection. Soon after, Priyanka began to experience health issues, prompting her mother to take her to Kerala for treatment involving Ayurvedic therapy. She stayed there for about 6 weeks, during which Satish frequently called her, kept up affectionate conversations, and even visited a few times, playing the role of a loving husband. This was all part of his act. He knew that by creating the image of a supportive spouse, he would leave no one suspicious of any malicious intent. When Priyanka returned home in early August, Satish had a surprise waiting. Aiming to strengthen her trust, he blindfolded her and led her into the living room. There, he removed the blindfold to reveal a large photograph capturing one of their happier moments together. The image, seemingly depicting an ideal family life, moved Priyanka deeply, and she felt herself trusting him again. Satish continued giving such gifts over the following days, reinforcing her belief that their relationship had finally reached a place of harmony. By the morning of August 10th, Satish had prepared a new surprise for Priyanka, one with an entirely different intention. He woke her up, hinting that he had something special planned, and suggested blindfolding her to enhance the surprise. Priyanka agreed, suspecting nothing, and Satish gently guided her to a chair, explaining it was all part of their game. When her hands were secured to the armrests, he continued as if everything was going according to plan. This gift would be her last. Eager to see what she thought was another thoughtful gesture, Priyanka even suggested he tie her hands so she wouldn't accidentally ruin the surprise. Smiling, full of trust, she allowed him to use a nylon rope, completely unaware of what was about to happen. She tried guessing what the surprise might be. Perhaps a diamond necklace, she thought out loud. But instead of jewelry, Satish skillfully slipped the rope around her neck and began to tighten it. Priyanka, realizing the horror of the situation, struggled to free herself, but with her wrists firmly bound, she couldn't move. Satish stood silently, watching her, taking in her tightly shut lips and wide, terror-filled eyes. He kept pulling the rope until he was certain she was no longer breathing. But, still unsure, he reached for a pair of gloves he had prepared to avoid leaving any evidence. With chilling composure, he then took a knife and, in a final act, cut her throat to ensure there was no chance she would survive. Knowing he now needed an alibi, Satish took Priyanka's phone and called his own number, making it appear as though she'd tried to reach him. After shutting off both phones, he went out for his usual morning run, where he conveniently encountered a friend, someone he knew could later vouch for his whereabouts if questions arose. He returned home around 6:40 a.m., locked the door from the outside, and calmly walked to his parents' house, about 3 miles away. There, he borrowed his father's car and drove to his workplace, pausing briefly at the entrance to create another layer to his alibi. Leaving the car back at his parents' house, Satish walked home, where the police were already waiting. As the police began scrutinizing his story, the first cracks appeared. On the surface, Satish's account seemed plausible, but as investigators spoke with Priyanka's family, troubling details emerged. Priyanka's relatives revealed that her married life with Satish had been far from happy. They claimed that right after the wedding, Satish and his family had begun to pressure Priyanka, sometimes even harassing her over minor issues. Many times, she had called her parents, crying and seeking comfort, but they had tried to reassure her, urging her to be patient and believing things would eventually improve. 2 years into their marriage, when the situation became unbearable, Priyanka suggested to Satish that they move into a place of their own. In 2010, they began renting an apartment in Holy Mount, hoping the change would ease tensions and help repair their relationship. However, the distance from his family did little to alter their attitude toward her. By the time of the crime, Satish's plan had fully formed, and every detail began falling into place. According to Priyanka's relatives, they believed his family might have been aware of his intentions and perhaps even supported him, though there was no evidence to confirm this. Police grew increasingly focused on Satish, gathering evidence against him, and soon he was taken into custody. His trial lasted several years, with speculation swirling over the motives behind his actions. Finally, on July 28, 2017, Satish was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime against Priyanka and for destroying evidence. He was also fined 225,000 rupees, sparking further public discussion. In prison, with no other path forward, Satish began assisting fellow inmates with their education, which eventually helped some gain qualifications. Years later, he attempted to appeal for a reduced sentence, citing his positive contributions, but the court remained firm. And so, this dark story came to an end, layered with lies, masks, and carefully crafted deception. The truth emerged, leaving behind only emptiness and countless questions. In this case, as in life, sometimes there is far more hidden behind closed doors than we can ever imagine. Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. September 28th, 2022, Chifa Alexandra Restaurant. A quiet evening, a relaxed atmosphere, peaceful conversations filling the air. Then, everything changed in a flash. A scream, panic, red stains on the tablecloth. One of the guests didn't make it out alive. Shirley Silva, a young woman with a troubled past, did something unimaginable. But how did it happen? What pushed her over the edge? Was she a heartless criminal or someone driven to the brink by circumstances? Shirley Silva was born in 1996 in Esperanza, a neighborhood in the port city of Callao, Peru, known as one of the most underprivileged areas in the region. From the very start, her environment shaped her reality. In a place where the weak didn't stand a chance, survival meant learning to fight, literally, from a young age. Her family was emblematic of the hardship surrounding them. Raised by a single mother with 11 sons and daughters, Shirley grew up in a household struggling to survive. There were no father figures. Their modest means came from odd jobs, street vending, and activities that often skirted the edge of legality. Meals depended on whatever could be found, but hunger and scarcity were a constant part of daily life. They lived in a makeshift shack patched together with plywood and corrugated metal. It had no plumbing, unreliable electricity, and a leaky roof. Outside, the streets were ruled by local gangs, illegal dealings, and an ever-present atmosphere of danger. People didn't ask questions when someone vanished. Disappearances were simply a part of the norm. This was the world Shirley grew up in, mistrusting others and feeling emotionally detached. From an early age, she showed signs of aggressive behavior and emotional coldness. In play, she was domineering, demanding obedience, and using physical force when challenged. Her family noticed troubling patterns. Her younger brother's tears would make her laugh, and her mother's exhaustion never seemed to stir any concern in her. Teachers in elementary school described her as withdrawn and unpredictable. She avoided interacting with classmates, often triggered confrontations, and reacted to criticism with either hostility or complete indifference. She showed little interest in learning, lacked empathy, and wasn't curious about the world around her. Disciplinary actions didn't deter her. In fact, her behavior only escalated. As Shirley grew older, it became increasingly clear. She didn't form emotional bonds, not with her family, not with anyone. Even her mother, despite relentless efforts, couldn't reach her. But Shirley learned something early on. Fear equals control. She began to manipulate her younger siblings, using threats and humiliation to get her way. This wasn't a defense mechanism. It was a calculated tactic to exploit the weaknesses of others. At home, she kept her distance emotionally, but she wasn't idle. Her behavior was far from unusual for Esperanza, where only those who could suppress emotions and act in their own interest stood a chance at making it. Her coldness wasn't viewed as a problem. It was seen as a sign of strength. In a place Where survival was the only goal, Shirley's toughness marked her as someone who might eventually make it out, or at least avoid being forgotten on the sidelines. But instead of breaking free from her surroundings, Shirley became a reflection of them. The environment didn't just shape her, it created her. No adult ever stepped in to redirect her path. By the time she was a teenager, Shirley wasn't just a troubled girl. She had become someone people started to fear. Calculated, unfeeling, and willing to push past any obstacle if it meant getting what she wanted. One day at school, a classmate made an offhand comment about her clothes. Shirley didn't argue. She pulled a blade and struck the girl in the shoulder. The classmate survived, but the incident sent shockwaves through the community. No one expected such a cold, deliberate act from someone her age over something so small. It wasn't a moment of impulse, it was a choice. After that, Shirley never returned to school. There wasn't any formal expulsion, no one pushed for her to come back. Her disappearance from the classroom went unnoticed. In her neighborhood, education wasn't a priority, and stepping away from school was seen as an expected outcome rather than a failure. With school behind her, Shirley started spending more time with her mother, who brought her into the world of informal street work. This wasn't employment in the traditional sense. These were occasional, unregulated jobs, selling cheap items on the sidewalk, collecting recyclables, and joining the street vendors hustling day to day. Eventually, her mother introduced her to a group of women involved in underground work tied to survival strategies many in the neighborhood relied on. Shirley didn't push back. She didn't ask questions. She accepted it all as normal. Her lack of emotional response extended beyond the situations she faced. It applied to people, too. The pain of others didn't affect her, and she didn't crave affection or approval. Her detachment wasn't a phase. It was who she had become. Life on the street hardened Shirley even more. What once showed up as basic hostility had now evolved into full-on dominance. It started with sharp words, then turned into threats, and eventually into physical intimidation. She wasn't afraid of men, didn't back down from confrontations, and if someone tried to take control over her, she responded fast and harshly. Shirley didn't engage in conversations, didn't open up, not even to her own mother. Her life became mechanical: earn money, complete a task, eliminate obstacles. Everything else, emotions, doubts, compassion, was pushed aside. Her interactions with the outside world existed only when absolutely necessary. Social isolation became her norm. Shirley didn't have close friends, and even acquaintances kept their distance. People who crossed paths with her on the street often described the same unsettling detail: her blank stare. She could be standing right next to someone, yet be completely checked out, unresponsive to either pleas or warnings. There was no fear in her, and that's what made her so unsettling. Freddie Ramirez had come to Peru from Venezuela, fleeing a collapsing economy and lack of opportunity. In Lima, he tried to build a new life, working as a cook, renting a room, keeping a low profile. Those around him often noted his friendly demeanor and quiet nature. Freddie wasn't confrontational. He avoided tension, compromised easily, and treated others with respect. These qualities earned him goodwill, but they also made him an easy target. His first encounter with Shirley seemed random. She just appeared, maybe in his favorite cafe, maybe on the street. Either way, it caught him off guard. Their connection was quick. Shirley was blunt, assertive, and knew how to take charge in conversation. Freddie, used to humility and gentleness, didn't see a red flag. He mistook her behavior for confidence and independence. At first, their relationship looked typical: casual meetings, chats, spending time together. But it didn't take long before control started creeping in. Shirley set the rules. She limited who Freddy could talk to, demanded obedience, and monitored his movements. She went through his phone, expected explanations for his time, and got involved in matters that weren't hers to control. Freddy tried to explain himself, to reason with her, to keep the peace, but each compromise only tightened her grip. With time, the relationship took a darker turn. What started as harsh words soon escalated into emotional outbursts, accusations of betrayal, threats to leave, and then physical confrontations. One of the earliest serious incidents happened when Freddy didn't answer her call. Shirley struck him in the face, splitting his lip. Freddy never told anyone. He didn't fight back, didn't file a complaint, didn't even mention it to those close to him. He chalked it up to an emotional breakdown and hoped it would never happen again. But it did, more than once. Their arguments became more intense, more unpredictable. She would suddenly accuse him of disrespecting her, of being unfaithful, then grab a kitchen knife and threaten him. On one occasion, she held a blade to his throat. Another time, she hit him on the back of the head with a frying pan. Freddy sought medical attention more than once, but each time he explained the injuries away as accidents. No police reports were ever filed. Their breakups became a recurring cycle. Freddy would try to walk away, turning off his phone and disappearing for a few days. But Shirley always found him. She would show up unannounced, banging on windows, shouting, creating scenes in public. Sometimes he returned on his own, clinging to hope for a fresh start. Other times, fear drove him back, fear born from her threats that no one else would ever be with him if he left her. And he believed that. To those around him, Freddy remained polite, but he was clearly changing. He shared less, kept his personal life tightly guarded. He hid his injuries. His co-workers noticed he had become anxious, that he laughed less, that he was sleeping poorly. Still, he showed up every day, doing his job with quiet determination. Freddy didn't see himself as a victim. He believed he was still in control. He thought he could change Shirley, help her see another way, bring peace through patience. But his efforts were in vain. By early fall of 2022, Shirley had all but taken over Freddy's life. He stopped trying to leave. He accepted that his existence was now dictated by her terms. In those final months, he simply tried to avoid setting her off, staying quiet, avoiding conflict. But that wasn't enough to save him. On the evening of September 28, 2022, Shirley Silva and Freddy Ramirez arrived at Chifa Alexandra, a modest Chinese-Peruvian restaurant in the La Victoria district, just outside central Lima. They took a seat near the back of the dining area. Other patrons were nearby, enjoying their meals. It was a typical night. Freddy appeared relaxed, eating calmly, chatting, showing no signs of distress. Shirley, on the other hand, was tense. She barely touched her food, spoke very little, and her face carried a stiff, distant expression. Her demeanor stood out, emotionless, detached, her eyes unfocused, locked on nothing in particular. Witnesses later described her as coldly composed, not angry or upset, just eerily quiet. There was no fight in the moments leading up to the crime, no yelling, no insults. According to surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts, Freddy continued eating peacefully, unaware, while Shirley, without saying a word, pulled out a knife and began her attack. There were a total of 8 stab wounds. The attack happened suddenly. The first strike landed on Freddy's neck, followed by blows to his chest and abdomen. It all took place in a matter of seconds. Freddy jumped up and tried to move away, but more strikes followed. He collapsed near the counter, bleeding heavily. Panic broke out. Some guests screamed, others tried to pull Shirley away, but by then she had already stepped back. The entire restaurant was thrown into chaos. Several customers ran out into the street. Staff members called emergency services and law enforcement. One of the guests tried to help Freddie, but his condition was already critical. When medical responders arrived, they confirmed he had not survived. Shirley didn't run. She stood near the entrance, watching the aftermath with a calm, blank expression. Witnesses would later say she looked neither scared nor confused. Her face remained unreadable. Moments later, she walked out of the restaurant at a normal pace, without rushing and without any attempt to hide. After the incident, Shirley headed toward the central bus terminal. She didn't try to disguise herself, didn't dispose of the weapon, didn't take any steps to avoid being found. Later, it was confirmed she simply hailed a cab and left. The attack on Freddie was cold, calculated, and devoid of panic. Her behavior before, during, and after pointed to complete control and a total absence of emotional hesitation. Once she left the restaurant, Shirley wandered through the city, walked into shops, and past strangers. She had no clear plan for escape. She was simply looking for someone she could turn to. That someone turned out to be Francisco, an acquaintance she'd occasionally been in touch with. Francisco saw her about 2 hours after the incident. The moment he laid eyes on her, he sensed something was wrong. She was composed and spoke very little. Then she told him directly. She had taken someone's life. He didn't believe her at first. So Shirley showed him an article online. The news had already started to spread. The report mentioned Freddie's name, a knife, and confirmed he hadn't survived. Francisco was stunned. A bit later, Francisco suggested recording a video. Shirley agreed. He turned on the camera and asked her a direct question. She didn't hesitate. Yes, I did it. He deserved it. The video wasn't long, but the message was crystal clear. After that, they went to a hotel together. Shirley rented a room and ordered drinks. Inside, she acted like everything was normal, drinking, smoking, talking casually. Francisco watched her closely, unsure what to do next. He felt uneasy, but Shirley showed no signs of aggression toward him. She was just there, silent at times, speaking in fragments. Several hours later, Francisco made a decision. He contacted law enforcement and reported Shirley's location. By that point, the authorities were already actively searching for her. Witness statements and security footage had helped narrow down her possible whereabouts. Francisco provided the exact address of the hotel without informing Shirley that he had made the call. Around 8 a.m., officers arrived at the location. The arrest was made without incident. Shirley opened the door, looked at the officers, and didn't ask a single question. She didn't argue, didn't try to flee. She allowed herself to be handcuffed and quietly walked to the vehicle. The entire scene unfolded in front of hotel staff and a few bystanders. The reaction was the same across the board. No one could believe that this was the same young woman responsible for such a violent crime. After her arrest, Shirley was taken to the police station. There, too, she remained completely calm. She didn't deny what had happened, didn't request legal counsel, and didn't ask for any clarification. She confirmed her identity and stated that she understood why she had been detained. In the initial report, officers noted that she displayed no emotional reaction, no signs of distress, and appeared fully composed. And so, less than 12 hours after the crime, Shirley Silva was in custody. Those 12 hours were the only brief stretch of freedom between the act and her arrest. During that time, there had been no panic, no remorse, just a chilling sense of detachment. Following her arrest, Shirley was transferred to the Lima Criminal Investigation Unit. She spent her first hours in holding, awaiting interrogation. Officers who interacted with her all noted the same thing, an eerie absence of emotion. To document her psychological state, an official video recording of the interrogation was made. In the footage, Shirley sits upright, her hands folded, her voice steady. The investigator asks her again, "Do you regret what you did?" Her response, "No. I don't feel anything." Her tone is flat, her face shows no tension, no hesitation. The statement is logged into the official record. Her demeanor is classified as emotionally disengaged, deeply inconsistent with the severity of the offense. Investigators were eager to understand the motive. Since Shirley chose to remain silent, the investigation relied heavily on testimonies and collected evidence. The focus quickly shifted to her relationship with Freddie. At first, theories revolved around jealousy or financial disputes, but soon, new witness accounts emerged, painting a very different picture. Freddie's co-workers, neighbors, and acquaintances provided consistent reports of both physical and psychological mistreatment. One of the kitchen staff recalled Freddie showing up to work with visible bruises. Another remembered the day Freddie asked to sleep at the cafe, afraid to go home. A former neighbor said she had heard yelling, threats, and loud banging coming from their apartment. It later came to light that Shirley had once stabbed Freddie in the arm, not fatally, but deep enough to cause significant bleeding. At the time, Freddie claimed it was an accident. Medical staff treated the injury, but no report was filed with law enforcement. The incident was later documented and added to the case file. Investigators also confirmed that just days before the attack, Freddie had once again tried to end the relationship. He moved out, changed his phone number, and avoided all contact. But Shirley found him. She insisted on meeting. By that point, Shirley had already made a decision, one she carried out at that dinner table. Psychological experts brought into the case conducted an evaluation of her mental state. Preliminary findings pointed to emotional dissociation, an absence of empathy, a disregard for social norms, and an inability to feel guilt. Shirley was found to be mentally competent, but showing signs of antisocial personality traits. She knew what she was doing and fully understood the consequences. When investigators asked again, why a public place? Why in front of witnesses? Shirley answered, "I didn't care." She didn't see the people around her as a deterrent, and their reactions didn't concern her. Her statements were direct, unaltered, and delivered with conviction. The investigation concluded that the crime stemmed from prolonged, one-sided aggression, systematic control and emotional pressure that Shirley exerted over the victim. Shirley Silva's case instantly became a national story. A violent act in a crowded restaurant, captured on camera, followed by a public confession, drew enormous attention. Major news outlets quickly ran detailed reports, focusing on the shocking nature of the event. Headlines highlighted the unusual profile of the accused, a young woman carrying out an act of extreme aggression in front of multiple witnesses with no sign of emotion. As the media storm grew, some outlets began capitalizing on the story. Talk shows, special reports, and eye-catching features followed. Interviews were conducted with neighbors, former acquaintances, and teachers who shared fragmented memories of Shirley. Certain media narratives leaned into speculation, portraying her either as a cold-blooded figure or as a tragic product of an unforgiving environment. Social media amplified the divide. After interrogation footage, confession clips, and photos were made public, online reactions became increasingly polarized. Viewers split into two camps. Some condemned Shirley outright, calling her dangerous, emotionless, and prone to calculated cruelty. Others tried to frame her actions within a broader context: poverty, street life, lack of protection, and early trauma. They didn't excuse what happened, but their tone leaned toward empathy rather than judgment. As the media storm raged on, a new wave emerged, romanticizing Shirley's image. On platforms like TikTok and Instagram, Clips began circulating with edited footage of her, set to emotional music and tagged with captions portraying her as the girl who was pushed too far. Some content creators used her likeness in stylized visuals, comparing her to iconic villains from popular films. Fan pages gained thousands of followers, posting aestheticized images of the accused. This triggered widespread backlash. While the accused was being elevated into a figure of fascination, the victim was largely forgotten. In the middle of this media frenzy, experts began analyzing what became known as the Shirley phenomenon. Journalists pointed to society's discomfort in viewing women as aggressors, especially in roles typically associated with men. Shirley's lack of visible emotion, no tears, no regret, no anxiety, challenged social expectations and created a sense of unease. Analytical pieces emerged, framing her behavior from a sociological lens. Commentators explained that seeing a woman devoid of fear or remorse, speaking calmly and coldly, feels unnatural to many. That perception triggered both rejection and, paradoxically, admiration from audiences drawn to figures who defy norms. At the same time, a public debate unfolded around the ethics of turning an accused individual into a cultural symbol. Was it appropriate to aestheticize someone on trial for a violent crime? Journalists reminded the public of the central truth. At the heart of this story was a man who lost his life in front of witnesses. In response, efforts were made to redirect attention to Freddie. His photos, personal memories, and tributes began circulating online. The public conversation split in two. Meanwhile, media and internet culture analysts began to shift the focus from psychological assessments to how aggression is interpreted online. They noted that digital content quickly detaches from its original context. Instead of confronting the harsh reality of what happened, the public gravitated toward memes, video edits, and stylized imagery. This trend blurred the line between actual events and entertainment, distorting the gravity of what had taken place. As a result, the Shirley Silva case evolved beyond a criminal trial. It became a full-fledged social phenomenon. Her image was no longer grounded in facts, consequences, or the memory of the victim. It took on a life of its own in the digital space, shaped by likes, shares, and algorithm-driven attention. The trial of Shirley Silva began several months after her arrest. The prosecution presented a well-documented, thorough case. The charges were clear: a deliberate act carried out with premeditation using a concealed weapon in a public setting. The defense aimed to lessen her responsibility. Her attorney pointed to a difficult upbringing, harsh social environment, lack of support, and a history of traumatic relationships. The topic of Shirley's mental health was raised, but the court denied the request to revisit the already completed psychological evaluation. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence. They emphasized the severity of the crime, its deliberate nature, the complete lack of remorse, and the risk of future violence if she were ever released. They also referenced the widespread media attention and its potential impact on public perception, arguing that this only increased the social threat posed by the defendant. The trial itself was brief. Witness testimonies were consistent, and all critical facts were confirmed. The prosecution called restaurant employees, close friends of the victim, and Francisco, the man who ultimately turned Shirley in. His account of Shirley's calm and collected behavior the night of the crime played a significant role in demonstrating that her actions were not impulsive, but calculated. The verdict was delivered in a closed session. Shirley Silva was found guilty of premeditated murder. The court listed several aggravating factors: her lack of remorse, the nature of the act, and its public impact. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. News of the sentencing spread rapidly, sparking a fresh wave of online reactions. Some called the verdict fair and expected. Others questioned whether her background and impoverished past should have been considered mitigating factors. The debate continued, but the legal outcome was final. Shirley was convicted. She was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility. There, she was placed in a single cell with minimal interaction with other inmates and under close supervision. Her behavior remained consistent, quiet, controlled, and isolated. According to prison staff, she made no complaints, didn't request visits, and never asked for assistance. Her days began and ended in silence. Facility psychologists attempted to engage her in conversation, but just like before, Shirley had little to say. When asked whether she felt any regret, she simply said no, offering no further explanation. Her stance never changed. She made no plea for leniency and never sought a retrial. Her mental state was described as stable, but emotionally closed off. Shirley Silva's story didn't end in freedom, but it didn't vanish either. She remained a subject of public discourse, a symbol of controversy, a case study in media, and a rare precedent in criminal justice. Her name continued to appear in journalistic reports, online discussions, and academic analyses. Although the case was officially closed, its societal impact endured. Beyond the prison walls, life carried on, a life Shirley was no longer a part of. Her fate was sealed by the court, isolated, restricted, and permanent. And she never once tried to challenge that decision. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.